moment my phone vibrated beside my husband's grave, I knew my life had split into a before and an after. I was standing there with my hands folded inside black gloves, the cold of early spring biting through the fabric, listening to the last of the pastor's words drift into the air. People say funerals feel unreal, like you're watching your own life from far away. For me, it felt quieter than that. Too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I had just buried the man I'd been married to for 43 years. His name was Harold, a careful man, a man who locked doors twice and kept his promises even when no one was watching. He was not the sort of man who disappeared, who played games, who left loose ends behind. When the doctors said his heart had failed suddenly in the night, I believed them. I had cried, yes, but I accepted it. At my age, you learn that fighting reality only breaks your heart twice. So, when my phone buzzed in my coat pocket, I almost ignored it. Funerals aren't the place for messages. But something made me look down. Maybe instinct, maybe the strange heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with grief. The screen lit up with a single message from an unknown number. I'm alive. I'm not in the coffin. Trust no one. For a moment, I truly thought my heart had stopped. The cemetery faded. The murmurs of family and friends blurred into a distant hum. I stared at those words as if they might rearrange themselves into something sensible. This wasn't funny. This wasn't cruel humor. And yet, my hands were shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. I typed back with fingers that no longer felt like my own. Who is this? The reply came almost instantly. I can't say. They are watching us. Don't trust the children. The children. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly looked up from the phone. My son and daughter stood a few feet away, close together, their faces solemn, practiced. My daughter dabbed her eyes with a tissue. My son kept his arm around her shoulders, just like he always had since they were small. They looked like grieving children. But suddenly, I felt like I was the only one who didn't know the script. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, as if it were something dangerous, something that might burn me if I held it too long. My mind raced, searching for explanations. A sick prank, a scammer who'd seen the obituary, someone trying to exploit a grieving widow. That's what I told myself. Yet Harold's voice echoed in my memory, calm and certain, the way it always was when he sensed trouble. If something ever feels off, Alina, he used to say, pay attention. Your feelings are smarter than you think. And something felt very off. When the service ended and people began to drift away, hugging me, offering casseroles and quiet condolences, I smiled and thanked them. I played my role well. Decades of being a wife and a mother teach you how to keep your face steady, even when your insides are coming apart. But as I hugged my children goodbye, I felt a strange distance, like there was glass between us. That night, alone in the house Harold and I had shared for so many years, I locked the doors, turned off the lights, and sat at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me. I read the message again and again. By midnight, I realized one thing with chilling clarity. If this message was a lie, it was a cruel one. But if it was true, then I had just buried an empty coffin. And the people closest to me might know exactly why. That night, sleep never came, only memories knocking softly and fear pacing the halls. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned and turned. The same one Harold had installed the summer we moved in. Every creak of the house sounded louder than usual. The refrigerator hummed like it was whispering secrets. I kept my phone on the pillow beside me, face up, waiting for it to light again. It didn't. By dawn, my grief had tangled itself with something sharper. Suspicion. I hated that feeling. I had raised my children with love, scraped knees, packed lunches, late-night talks at the kitchen table. I didn't want to believe a single word of that message. And yet, I couldn't ignore it either. When the sun rose, I made coffee the way Harold liked it, even though he wasn't there to complain it was too strong. Habit is a stubborn thing. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and tried to think clearly. The funeral arrangements had been handled quickly. Too quickly, now that I replayed it all. The hospital called. The paperwork arrived. The viewing was closed casket because, they said, there had been complications. At the time, I hadn't questioned it. I trusted my children to handle what I couldn't. Trust. That word sat heavy in my chest. Mid-morning, my son came by to check on me. He brought groceries I hadn't asked for and spoke gently, the way people do when they think you might break. He suggested I rest, maybe consider staying with them for a few days. I studied his face as he talked. The lines around his eyes looked deeper than usual. He avoided my gaze just a bit too often. "Mom," he said carefully, "you shouldn't be alone right now." "I've been alone before," I replied, keeping my voice soft. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. After he left, I went to the study. Harold's room. The place where he paid bills, wrote letters, and kept things he didn't want cluttering the rest of the house. I hadn't stepped inside since before the funeral. The door resisted slightly when I pushed it open, like it didn't want me in there. Everything looked normal at first. Too normal. Then I noticed the desk drawer was locked. That drawer had never been locked in 43 years of marriage. My heart began to pound as I tried the handle again. Locked. I checked the small tin where Harold kept spare keys. It was gone. I sat back in the chair and closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the silence press down on me. That message echoed in my head. They are watching us. Who was they? That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "You shouldn't be searching yet," the message read. "They'll notice." I stared at the screen, my pulse roaring in my ears. "What do you want from me?" I typed. Several seconds passed. Then, "I want you safe. Harold planned for this, but only if you're patient." Patient. I had waited my whole life. For love, for forgiveness, for children to grow up and find their way. this was different. This was waiting with a knife at your back. I slipped the phone into my pocket just as a car pulled into the driveway. My daughter. She stepped out smiling, carrying a box labeled important papers. And in that moment, watching her walk toward the front door with something that looked far too official, I understood one terrifying truth. Whatever Harold had planned, my children were already moving without me. The box in my daughter's arms felt heavier than it should have. Even before she set it down on the kitchen table, she hugged me first, long and tight, the way she used to when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. For a split second, I almost forgot everything. The message, the locked drawer, the warning. Almost. I brought some things from the house, she said brightly, nudging the box toward me. Just paperwork. Stuff we should sort sooner rather than later. Sooner. Another word that suddenly made my stomach tighten. I nodded and sat across from her, folding my hands in my lap. She opened the box and began pulling out folders, stacking them neatly like she was following a script. Insurance documents, utility bills, copies of the death certificate. I counted them without meaning to. Too organized, too rehearsed. I thought we could go through these together, she said. You don't have to worry about all this on your own. I never said I was worried, I replied gently. Her eyes flicked up to mine, then away again. As she talked, I studied her face. She looked tired, not the grief kind of tired, the kind that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. When she reached for another folder, her hand shook just slightly. Did your father mention anything unusual lately? I asked, keeping my voice casual. She paused, fingers resting on the cardboard edge of the box. Unusual how? Plans, concerns, things he wanted done, I said. She exhaled and smiled, a little too fast. Dad was always planning things. You know that, I did. But Harold had a habit of looping me into everything, even his smallest worries, especially near the end. As my daughter kept talking, my phone vibrated softly in my pocket. Once, then again. I didn't look at it. She slid a document toward me. This one needs your signature. I glanced down. It was a power of attorney form. My hand froze. For what? I asked. Just temporary, she said quickly. Until everything settles, it'll make things easier. For everyone. Easier for who? I pushed the paper back toward her. I'd like to read it first. Her smile faltered. Of course, take your time. But I could feel the shift in the room, like a breeze before a storm. The air grew thick with things unsaid. After she left, the house felt emptier than it had after the funeral. I locked the front door and leaned against it, my knees weak. My phone buzzed again. This time, I read it. They're rushing you. That means the timeline moved up. My fingers trembled as I typed back. Who are you? A long pause. Then, someone your husband trusted when he couldn't trust his own blood. Tears welled in my eyes, not from fear, but from heartbreak. Harold had always believed family was everything. If he'd reached outside it, something must have gone terribly wrong. evening, I went back to the study. I searched the bookshelves, the filing cabinet, even the old coat pockets hanging in the closet. Nothing, until I noticed a small scratch behind a framed photo of Harold and me at the lake. I lifted the frame. A tiny safe built into the wall. My breath caught as I pressed my palm against it. I didn't know the code, but I knew Harold. He loved dates, anniversaries, things that mattered. I tried our wedding day. The lock clicked open. Inside was a flash drive and a folded note in Harold's handwriting, and before I could open either, my phone buzzed once more. "Do not watch the videos alone," the message warned. "They explain everything, but only if you're ready." I sank into Harold's chair, clutching the note to my chest, realizing this was no longer about grief. It was about survival. I sat there for a long time, the note unopened, the flash drive cold and heavy in my palm. There are moments in life when you can feel the ground shift beneath you, even if you're sitting perfectly still. That was one of them. The house I had lived in for decades suddenly felt unfamiliar, like it had been holding its breath, waiting for me to catch up to a truth it already knew. I unfolded the note with care, as if the paper itself might break. "My dearest Ruth, if you are reading this, then something has gone wrong sooner than I hoped." My heart thudded painfully in my chest. Harold's handwriting was steady, calm. The same hand that had written grocery lists and birthday cards now carried a weight I had never seen before. "I can't explain everything here. Not on paper. Not where it can be found. What you're holding is proof, but also protection. Please do not confront anyone. Not yet. And whatever you do, don't let them know you found this." Tears blurred the words. "You always trusted our children." I did too. But trust can be misplaced when fear and money get involved. I needed time. Time you may not have been given. I pressed the note to my lips, the ache in my chest sharp and sudden. Harold hadn't just been planning for his death. He'd been planning for betrayal. The flash drive sat beside the note, small and ordinary. It terrified me more than anything else in that room. I didn't own a laptop anymore. My son had insisted I didn't need one, said everything could be handled for me. Handled. Another word that now made my skin prickle. I slipped both items into the pocket of my cardigan and quietly closed the safe. Before leaving the study, I looked around once more, memorizing everything. If someone had already been searching, I wanted to know what had changed. That night, I barely touched my dinner. I sat at the table alone, listening to the ticking of the clock Harold had repaired so many times I'd lost count. With every second, my resolve hardened. I couldn't do this alone. I waited until after 10, when I knew my children would be home and unlikely to stop by unannounced. Then I picked up my phone and typed a single message to the unknown number. "I'm ready." The reply came almost instantly. "Good. Tomorrow morning, take the bus to Maple Street. Sit on the bench by the old bakery at exactly 9. Bring only what's in your pockets. Trust no one. I stared at the screen, my hands cold. Maple Street was on the other side of town, a place I hadn't been in years. The idea of taking a bus alone at my age scared me, but the thought of staying still scared me more. Before bed, I hid the flash drive inside an old sewing kit in the hall closet. If someone came looking while I slept, they wouldn't find it easily. As I turned off the light, I whispered into the darkness, "I'm listening, Harold." Morning came too quickly. I dressed plainly, choosing the coat with the deep pockets and the sensible shoes Harold always teased me about. When I stepped outside, the air felt sharp and alert, like the world was watching. At the bus stop, I noticed a car parked across the street that hadn't been there before. The engine was off, but someone sat inside, waiting. I kept my eyes forward, my heart pounding, and boarded the bus without looking back. As it pulled away, my phone vibrated one last time. "If anyone asks where you're going," the message read, "tell them you're going to say goodbye." And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about uncovering the past. It was about stepping into a future Harold had hidden for me. One I wasn't sure I was brave enough to face. The bus ride felt longer than it really was. Every stop another chance for doubt to creep in. I sat near the window, clutching my purse like it might float away if I let go. The city slid past in familiar pieces that suddenly felt distant. The pharmacy where Harold picked up my prescriptions, the park where we used to walk after dinner. Life moving on, unaware that mine had tilted off its axis. When the bus finally hissed to a stop near Maple Street, my legs felt stiff as I stood. The old bakery was still there, though boarded up now, its faded sign barely hanging on. I found the bench beside it and sat down, just as instructed. 9 o'clock came and went. I checked my watch. 9:02. Every sound made me flinch. Footsteps, a car door slamming, someone laughing down the block. I wondered if I'd been foolish, if grief had made me vulnerable to some cruel game. Then a man approached from across the street. He was younger than I expected, maybe in his late 40s, wearing a plain jacket and carrying a paper bag like he'd just picked up breakfast. He didn't look at me at first. He sat on the far end of the bench, leaving a polite distance between us. "You're early," he said quietly. "I'm not," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. That made him smile. He turned slightly toward me, careful not to be obvious. "My name is Daniel. Your husband asked me to watch over a few things, including you." My throat tightened. Hearing Harold mentioned so plainly felt like reopening a wound. "He said you'd be cautious," Daniel continued, "that you wouldn't trust easily. He was proud of that." I looked down at my hands. Why all this secrecy? "Because not everyone wanted Harold alive long enough to finish what he started," he said. The words landed hard. Daniel reached into the paper bag and pulled out a small coffee, setting it between us. "You don't have to drink it," he added gently. "It's just to make us look ordinary." I almost laughed. Almost. I have something, I said quietly. A flash drive. His eyes flickered with relief. Good. Then he got it to you. What's on it? I asked. Records, conversations, financial movements that don't make sense unless you know where to look, Daniel said. Enough to explain why your husband staged what looks like a very clean ending. My breath caught. Staged. Daniel didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back and scanned the street, his posture relaxed, but alert. He knew someone was siphoning money through accounts tied to family assets, he said finally. Not just money, control, power of attorney, medical decisions, timelines. My mind raced back to the papers my daughter had brought. The urgency, the signatures. He tried to confront them, Daniel went on, quietly, gently. But once they realized he wasn't backing down, things escalated. Is he alive? I whispered. Daniel met my eyes then, his expression serious but kind. I can't answer that yet. Not here. My chest ached with hope and fear twisting together. He stood, brushing invisible dust from his jacket. You did well coming today. But this was only step one. Step one of what? I asked. Of making sure the truth comes out, he said. And that you don't lose everything Harold spent a lifetime building. As he walked away, he left one last sentence hanging in the air. By tonight, someone will realize you're no longer where they expect you to be. I sat there long after he disappeared, the weight of his words settling in. For the first time since the funeral, I wasn't just mourning. I was preparing. By the time I returned home, the house no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a stage someone else had been using when my back was turned. I unlocked the front door slowly, listening for anything out of place. The silence was heavy, almost deliberate. I stepped inside and stood still, my heart pounding, half expecting someone to speak my name from another room. Nothing. At first glance, everything looked the same. The coat rack, the rug by the door, Harold's shoes still neatly lined up like he might need them tomorrow. But once I allowed myself to really look, the differences revealed themselves. A drawer in the hallway table was slightly open. I knew I'd closed it. I didn't touch it. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, set my purse down, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands shook as I drank. Whoever had been here wanted me to notice just enough. A reminder. My phone buzzed. Don't react, the message read. They're testing you. I let out a slow breath and forced myself to move calmly. I straightened a cushion on the couch, turned on the television, even laughed softly at a silly daytime show. If anyone was watching, I wanted them to see the same grieving widow they expected. An hour later, my daughter called. Mom, she said, her voice bright but strained. I tried stopping by earlier. You weren't home. I went for a walk, I replied. Fresh air helps. Oh, she said, a pause. You should let me know next time we worry. We, another word that now felt crowded. I'm fine, I said, just tired. Well, we're coming by tomorrow to finish paperwork, she said quickly. There are some deadlines. Tomorrow, I repeated. That's fine. After we hung up, I sat down at the table and stared at the wood grain, remembering every family meal we'd shared there. Laughter, arguments, forgiveness. How had it all turned into this? That evening, I retrieved the flash drive from the sewing kit and tucked it inside the lining of my purse. If they were already searching the house, it wasn't safe anywhere else. Just before bed, another message came through. They've noticed the house access log, Daniel wrote. Someone entered while you were out. My chest tightened. How do you know? Because they called me, trying to confirm you were still cooperative, he replied. You are for now. I lay awake that night, replaying every conversation from the past few months. The hospital visits, the rushed decisions, the way Harold had squeezed my hand and whispered, "Promise me you'll pay attention." I hadn't understood then. I did now. The next morning, I made myself presentable. Not polished, not sloppy, just the way they liked me. Predictable, manageable. My daughter and son-in-law arrived together, their footsteps confident, like they already owned the place. They spread documents across the table again, explaining things I barely heard. Just sign here, my son-in-law said, tapping the page. I smiled gently. I'd like to wait, he frowned. Wait for what? For the full picture, I said. The room went still. My daughter's eyes widened slightly. Mom, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I folded my hands. I'm not making it harder, I said softly. I'm making it slower. Silence stretched between us. Then my son-in-law leaned back in his chair, his voice cool. We're only trying to help. I met his gaze and realized something important. They weren't afraid of my grief. They were afraid of my patience, and that told me everything I needed to know. As they gathered their papers and left, my phone vibrated in my pocket. You did exactly right, Daniel wrote. But they'll escalate next. I stared at the closed door, my reflection faint in the glass. If this was a game of waiting, I intended to outlast them. Because Harold had taught me one thing above all else. Silence can be a weapon, but only if you know when to break it. The quiet that followed their departure was louder than any argument we'd ever had. I stood at the window long after their car pulled away, watching the street like it might reveal something if I stared hard enough. My reflection looked older than it had a week ago. Not weaker, just sharper, like grief had peeled something away and left the truth exposed underneath. I knew Daniel was right. They would escalate, and they didn't make me wait long. That afternoon, I received a call from the bank. Mrs. Hale, the woman said politely, we're calling to verify a request to change account access permissions. My heart skipped. I didn't request any changes. There was a pause, papers shuffling. The request came from someone listed as an authorized family contact. Family. That word again. I'd like to place a temporary freeze on all changes, I said, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Effective immediately. Another pause. Of course, I'll note that. When I hung up, My hands finally started to tremble. They were moving faster now, trying doors, testing locks. I didn't have the luxury of pretending anymore. That evening, Daniel called for the first time. Hearing a real voice after days of typed warnings made everything feel suddenly more real. They tried to reroute funds, he said without preamble. You stopped it just in time. Then it's true, I whispered. They're trying to take control. Yes, he said. And once they do, you become an inconvenience. The word settled heavily between us. What about Harold? I asked. Why fake his death? Daniel exhaled slowly. Because he discovered the fraud too late. Once they realized he knew, his health incident became useful. My stomach turned. You're saying they would have let him die? I'm saying they didn't stop it, Daniel replied carefully. Tears slid down my cheeks, not dramatic, not loud. Just steady grief finally finding a place to land. There's more, Daniel continued. The flash drive you have. It's part of a larger record. Harold copied it because he suspected someone close was monitoring his devices. Which means, I said quietly, they might know it exists. Yes, Daniel said, but they don't know where it is, or if you understand what it means. I looked around my living room, the photos, the furniture, the life we'd built piece by piece. It was no longer just memory. It was evidence. What do I do? I asked. For now, nothing, Daniel said. You continue to appear cooperative, confused, slow. Meanwhile, I prepare the rest. The rest of what? A meeting, he said, with people who can make the truth very inconvenient for your children. That night, my daughter texted me, We're worried about you. You seem different. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Grief changes people, I typed. You'll understand someday. She didn't respond. Instead, 30 minutes later, there was a knock at my door, not a gentle one. Firm, insistent. I stood in the hallway, my heart hammering, knowing instinctively this wasn't a visit born of concern. My phone buzzed once more in my hand. Do not open the door, Daniel warned. This is the pressure phase. The knocking grew louder. Mom, my son-in-law's voice called through the door. We just want to talk. I leaned my forehead against the wood, memories flooding in. Birthday cakes, laughter, trust freely given, and I realized something with startling clarity. They still thought I was afraid. They still thought I was alone. They were wrong on both counts. I straightened my back, took a deep breath, and stepped away from the door, not opening it, not answering, letting the silence do the work, because sometimes the most powerful move isn't confrontation. It's refusing to play by the rules they expect. And as the knocking finally stopped, I knew the next phase wouldn't be quiet at all. The next morning arrived wrapped in an uneasy calm, the kind that settles right before something breaks. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately, as if every step mattered. I brewed tea instead of coffee, letting the kettle scream longer than necessary, grounding myself in ordinary sounds. If this was going to unravel, I wanted to face it awake, not shaken. Around noon, Daniel texted. They've contacted a lawyer. Not a good one, a loud one. I almost smiled. Loud meant careless. What happens now? I typed back. Now, he replied, we let them think they're winning. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since Harold was alive. I went through every drawer. I found things I'd forgotten. Old letters, receipts, notes scribbled in Harold's hand, some affectionate, some frustrated. One envelope caught my attention. It was addressed to me, but postmarked months ago. It had never been mailed. Inside was a list of names, account numbers, and one line underlined twice. If anything happens to me, Ruth must remain legally competent. My breath caught. That was it. That was the line they were trying to erase. By evening, my daughter called again, her tone brittle. Mom, we're concerned, she said. You're making things complicated. I'm reading, I replied simply. What? Everything, I said. It takes time, she sighed, a sound full of impatience. We're only trying to protect you. I thought of the bank call, the locked drawer, the rushed paperwork. Protection shouldn't feel like pressure, I said softly. She didn't answer. The line went dead. An hour later, Daniel called. Tomorrow morning, he said, you're going to receive a formal notice. Emergency guardianship petition. My stomach tightened. They're going to try to declare me unfit. Yes, he said, and that's exactly what we want. I closed my eyes. You're sure? They have no idea what they're walking into, Daniel replied. Because Harold planned for witnesses. Witnesses, I whispered. People who saw what happened before the hospital, he said. And people who followed the money. That night, I barely slept. Not from fear, from anticipation. By 10, the next morning, the knock came. This time, I answered. A man in a crisp suit stood on my porch, holding a clipboard. He spoke carefully, formally, as if reading from a script. Mrs. Hale, he said, I'm here to serve you notice of a temporary guardianship hearing. I nodded calmly. I was expecting you. His eyebrows lifted. I took the papers, thanked him, and closed the door with steady hands. My phone buzzed immediately. Good, Daniel wrote. Now the game becomes public. As I read through the notice, something remarkable happened. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel cornered. I felt prepared. Because once they put my competence on trial, everything Harold had protected, the evidence, the recordings, the records, could finally be introduced without secrecy. They had forced the door open themselves. And for the first time since the funeral, I smiled. Because tomorrow, they would stand in a room where silence wouldn't protect them anymore. And they had no idea what was about to speak. The courtroom smelled like old paper and polished wood, a place where secrets don't last long. I arrived early, dressed the way Harold always liked me to be when something mattered. Neat, simple, unassuming, not to impress anyone, not to make a statement, just to be taken seriously. Daniel was already there, standing near the doors, his posture calm, his face unreadable. They're inside, he said quietly. I nodded, didn't look. I could feel them anyway. When we took our seats, my daughter sat rigid beside her husband, whispering urgently to their lawyer. Papers shuffled. Pens clicked. Nervous sounds. The kind people make when they're pretending to be confident. The judge entered, and the room fell into order. Their lawyer spoke first. He described me as fragile, confused by grief, vulnerable. He said my husband's passing had left me disoriented, incapable of handling my own affairs. He spoke kindly, smoothly, like someone explaining a problem he'd already solved. I listened without interrupting. Then Daniel stood. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "this petition assumes Mrs. Hale lacks understanding. We'd like to demonstrate the opposite." He turned to me. "Mrs. Hale, why did you refuse to sign the power of attorney documents presented to you?" I lifted my chin. "Because I was pressured," I said, "and because my husband asked me never to sign anything under pressure." A murmur spread through the room. Daniel continued, "Did your husband leave you any explanation for that request?" "Yes," I said, "several." Daniel handed the judge a folder. Audio recordings, written notes, and financial records documenting unauthorized attempts to access Mrs. Hale's assets. My daughter's face went pale. The recordings played next. Familiar voices filled the room. Calm voices, confident voices, discussing timelines, accounts, control, talking about me as if I weren't there, as if I weren't listening. I kept my eyes forward. The judge stopped the playback. "These materials raise serious concerns," she said, "including potential exploitation." Their lawyer stood quickly. "Your Honor, this is—" "Sit down," the judge said sharply. Silence fell. Daniel spoke again. "We also have witnesses who can testify that Mr. Hale suspected this behavior prior to his hospitalization." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Hale, were you aware of any attempts to limit your access to your finances?" "Yes," I said, "more than one." The judge closed the file. "The petition for guardianship is denied." A sharp breath escaped somewhere behind me, but the judge wasn't finished. "This matter will be referred for further investigation," she added. "All parties are advised to seek independent legal counsel." The room erupted into motion. Outside, Daniel rested a hand lightly on my arm. "There's something else," he said. I looked at him. "What?" "Harold planned for this moment," Daniel said. "Now that everything is public, it's safe." "Safe for what?" I asked. He met my eyes, his voice steady. "For you to see him." My heart stopped. "See who?" I whispered. "Your husband." The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet, because suddenly the funeral didn't feel like an ending anymore. It felt like the moment before a door finally opens, and whatever waited on the other side was something I had been holding my breath for, without even knowing it. I didn't speak for a long moment. I wasn't sure my voice would hold. Daniel guided me to a quiet bench outside the courthouse, away from curious eyes and whispered questions. My hands were cold, though the sun was warm on my face. I kept replaying his words over and over, like they might change if I examined them closely enough. For you to see him. Where? I finally asked. How? Daniel sat beside me, careful, respectful. Not here, not today, but soon. Harold had to disappear completely until the truth surfaced. If he'd stayed visible, even to you, it would have put you both in danger. I swallowed hard. You're telling me my husband let me bury an empty coffin? Yes, Daniel said quietly, and he hated every second of it. The pain of that truth hit me all at once. The nights I cried myself to sleep. The way I touched his clothes in the closet, convinced I'd never feel him again. The loneliness that had hollowed me out. He watched, Daniel continued, from a distance. Every step you took. He trusted you more than anyone, Ruth. That's why you couldn't know. Not until now. Tears slid down my cheeks, but this time they weren't just grief. They were anger, relief, love, all tangled together. Why the message at the funeral? I asked. Because the timeline moved, Daniel said. Someone pushed too hard, too fast. Harold needed you alert, awake. I let out a shaky breath. He always did have terrible timing. Daniel smiled faintly. He said you'd say that. We sat in silence for a while. Around us, people passed by, unaware that my entire world had just cracked open again. That evening, I returned home alone. The house felt different now. Not watched, not staged, just quiet. I cooked a simple dinner and ate at the table where Harold and I had shared so many meals. For the first time since the funeral, I set 2 plates before catching myself. I didn't move the second one away. Instead, I left it there. My phone buzzed just after 9. Tomorrow, Daniel wrote, pack a small bag. Only essentials, no explanations to anyone. I stared at the message, then at the framed photo of Harold on the mantel. His smile looked softer now, almost knowing. I always told you I'd find my way back to you, I whispered. That night, I packed slowly. A change of clothes, my medications, the note Harold had written. I hesitated, then added our old photo from the lake, the one that had hidden the safe. Before bed, my daughter texted, "We need to talk." I closed my eyes and typed back, "Not tonight." It felt like the first boundary I'd ever set without guilt. When I turned off the light, I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. For the first time in days, sleep came gently, and as I drifted off, one thought wrapped around my heart, steady and sure. Whatever waited for me tomorrow, I would finally hear the truth from the man who knew my heart better than anyone. And I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive him, but I was ready to see him. The place Daniel took me to the next morning wasn't dramatic or hidden behind gates. It was a quiet rental house near the edge of town, the kind you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. Pale siding, a small porch, wind chimes tapping softly in the breeze. My heart knew before my eyes did. The door opened slowly, and there he was. Harold stood in front of me, thinner than I remembered, his hair more gray than silver now, but his eyes were the same. the same gentle steadiness that had carried me through 43 years of marriage. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said my name, just once. Ruth. I didn't run to him. I didn't shout. I simply stepped forward and rested my forehead against his chest, listening to the sound I had mourned like it was gone forever. His heartbeat, strong, real. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never wanted you to suffer." I pulled back and looked at him properly, really looked. "You let me bury you," I said quietly. Not angry, just honest. "I know," he said, and it almost broke me. We sat at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around mugs of tea that had long gone cold. He told me everything. How he'd discovered the money being moved, how confronting it quietly had only made things worse. How the medical scare had been real, but the death had not. "I knew if I stayed visible," he said, "they'd finish what they started, and you'd be the next target." "So you disappeared," I said. "So I trusted you to survive without answers," he replied. "And you did." That part settled into me gently. Not pride, recognition. Later, when I asked about our children, his face softened with sadness. "They lost their way," he said. "Fear and entitlement can turn love into something ugly if you're not careful." We didn't talk about punishment or revenge. That had already been handed over to people who deal in facts, not feelings. What mattered now was what came next. I chose to go home, not to pretend nothing happened, but to live openly again. Slowly, on my terms, Harold stayed away for a while longer. Not out of fear, but out of respect for the process. We wrote letters like teenagers, laughed at the absurdity of it all, and learned how to speak honestly again, without secrets meant to protect. Months later, when he finally walked back through our front door, the house didn't feel staged anymore. It felt earned. Here's what I learned, sitting by the fireplace now, telling you this story with hands that no longer shake. Age does not make you weak. Silence does not mean ignorance. And love doesn't disappear just because the world thinks you're finished. Sometimes, the greatest strength of an elderly woman is not her voice, but her patience, her ability to wait, to observe, to choose the moment when truth can no longer be ignored. If you're listening to this and feeling overlooked, underestimated, or rushed into decisions you don't understand, remember this. You are allowed to slow things down. You are allowed to ask questions. And you are allowed to protect yourself, even from the people you love. Because wisdom doesn't announce itself loudly. It waits. And when it finally speaks, the whole room listens. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this, and if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.